This healing is going to take a great deal of energy to make it happen. And I want to talk a little bit about why, what is needed. The central spiritual crisis of our time is how to overcome the selfishness, materialism, and looking out for number one with a new ethos of caring for each other and the planet. As long as the former prevails, there is no chance of protecting ourselves from the worsening consequences of the environment, of the environmental deterioration, and perhaps even permanent destruction of the life support system of the planet, or minimally the destruction of human life on Earth. That's what's at stake. We can't overcome, we can't save this planet. We can't take care of each other unless we can overcome the ethos of selfishness and materialism. We live in a uniquely troubling moment in the history of the human race. A small group of humans, less than 5% of the whole of human race, have vastly disproportionate wealth. And we have used, and they have used their wealth to shape the economic, political, legal, and cultural realities of the world we live in. Their very overt goal is to continue to maximize their wealth without regard to the consequences for the rest of humanity and for the earth itself. They shape their influence in both major political parties and in the media that they own and control. How this happens is all based on a corruption of spiritual communities in the ancient world, to start with. The triumph of Rome over Judea in the late Second Temple period, from about 40 BCE to 70 CE, and the ability of the Romans to appoint corrupt priests whose loyalty was more to Rome than to God or Torah. Then follows after that is an emerging Christianity that originally was inspired by Jesus' teachings in favor of the poor and the powerless, but that getting undermined as the church became an adjunct to Constantine in 320 of the current era, and then becoming a major ally to ruling elites in the period that we now call the Middle Ages, imposing their rule in alliance with local feudal lords, and eventually selling guaranteed salvation in heaven to those who donate much of their wealth to the church. And that in turn led to a rebellion against the church, partly in the form of the Protestant alternative to Catholicism, partly in the emergence of a new economic class that sought power for itself. No society can ever be stable for long periods of time when they are based on inequality and oppression. And so the newly developing group of traders, storekeepers, artisans, bankers, people who were selling their products individually, they had to deal with the justification that the old order had, the feudal order had, that claimed to have their inequalities based on God's will. However, the truth of the matter is that much of what made feudalism work, like slavery before it, like the ancient world, was force and violence. This new class that emerged, that became known as the bourgeoisie, found support in the revival of science, which they embraced. Scientists as you know, used the empirical approach to understand the physical world. But the bourgeoisie needed something to justify their own class getting power. So they began to develop what I call scientism, which was the extension of the methodology of science into a criterion of what is real and what is not real. What is real, not the scientists. The scientists never did this, okay? This is scientism. This is a misuse of the scientific method. But what scientism did was taught is that anything that can be known and anything that is real has to be potentially verified through sense experience, like our senses, our nose, our mouth, our eyes, our bodies, or through measurement. And everything else, everything that can't be measured or can't be verified through your sense data is not to be valued. When people adopt the notion that the only thing that which can be measured or intersubjectively valid by sense data can be considered real. That is, everything that, if you want to say something is real, it has to be verifiable in that way, and all the rest is literally, well, here's the word that became popular in the rule of the bourgeois class: nonsense. Nonsense. It's nonsense. But why we use that word as a way of dismissing anything that doesn't deserve respect. Okay, but that came as a result of the increasing use by this new class of the notion that what's real is only that which can be verified through empirical observation or measured. And what's the thing that's most easy for that to happen? Well, the problem is clearly aesthetics, consciousness, love, joy, awe, and wonder at the universe. These are things which had played a major role in the religions that had been partially subordinated in the rise of this new class, but were dismissed by scientism. Okay, what the scientific worldview said was that these were things that had no objective value. They might be something that you could be allowed to do in your private life, but in public life, no. There was it had no value. It was nonsense. So with scientism as their weapon, the newly emerging bourgeoisie was able to overthrow the old feudal order in the name of freedom. Okay, so now overthrowing an old order on the basis of a new worldview is itself an innovation in human history. But the bourgeoisie at first did not have an army. It had a set of ideas that were seen by the people who were into Catholicism, even Protestantism, as somewhat vulgar and not very much value. But as the bourgeoisie succeeded in getting scientism to be more widely held, more and more people started to resonate to that supposedly scientific, but it wasn't scientific. It was a distortion of science. It was another religion, really. So this new religion, of scientism, validated itself in the name of freedom from an imposed religion on everyone. Now, of course, I think if I had been alive in that time, 400 years ago, 500 years ago, I probably would have been on the side of the new bourgeois class, because it was a good idea to get out of feudalism and to have your religion imposed on you. But their concept of freedom was one that also meant abandoning things that the church had set up and that other previous religious communities had set up, namely the notion of a fair price. The church had set up the notion that and imposed it on people that what a fair price would be good for selling consumer goods to others. Similarly, they had a fair wage for workers. Now, you can imagine this new class that was trying to get freedom from the feudal order was particularly wanting to get freedom from anything that authoritatively said, here's what's a fair price, and here's what's a fair wage for workers. And that's what the church had done, perhaps more towards the end of the feudal period, more in theory than in practice. But this was precisely what troubled the new class when they sought freedom. When they sought freedom, it was freedom to charge any price you could get from people who needed what you were selling. Freedom from having to pay a living wage for your workers. Okay? Freedom to not have to be responsible to your neighbor or anyone else. But also the freedom to look after yourself as number one. So this is the new worldview that became the major worldview of capitalist society. And with the credibility of science growing fast, because science was a good thing and it was producing many genuinely good things that made work easier, and many thought and through the use of machines, and the attendant religion of scientism became the standard of rationality. You couldn't verify your religion or ethical claims, so they were pushed to the side as nonsense. And of course, what can you verify through your sense data or through measurement? Well, the easiest thing to verify through observation or measurement is money. So money became really the hidden but not so hidden God of the universe. The God of this new society became money. And it was the one thing, unlike our vision of a transformative power in the universe, money is something you could count, you could put your hand on, you could give it to people. So it became the God, I should say, truly the idol of the modern era. Increasingly, money became the measure of all that is valuable, and increasingly, people have been seen as valuable only or primarily to the extent that they have or can create for others or for themselves more and more money. So this is at the center of the religion of the modern world. Now, you might say, wait a second, I don't know of a church that just is about money. They talk about all kinds of other things. That's true. But this was an all-pervading value that has infiltrated everything, including every church, every synagogue, every spiritual practice. More and more and more, the hidden secret is money. How much it's going to make for you? How much is it going? What's it going to cost you? Like that. This was the primary form of idolatry. Now, why do I call it a religion? Why not just say a belief system? Okay, because you see, they were trying to get rid of the money of the religions of the past and saying, see, this is something that's real, and it's based on a true vision of what counts in the world. But actually, it was not that had always been the case. It wasn't always the case, but that it was being sold to the people of the modern world. But when you look at its founding principle, the founding principle is that which is real, or that which can be, or that which can exist and verified existence is something that is verifiable through sense datum or measurement. Well, that statement that I've just said, things that are real are things that can be verified through sense datum or measured, is a statement that cannot be verified through sense datum or measurement. There is no measurement for claiming that the world is that what's real is that which can be verified through sense datum. There is no measurement, or there's no sense datum for saying that the only thing that counts is that which can be measured through sense datum or measurement. Where did that come from? It was another religion. It happens, though, whenever you're in a religion, you can know that you're in a religious worldview when everybody you know takes that as obvious. Okay? It's obvious because we have been so indoctrinated over the course of the 400 years since the capitalist class became the dominant, that it's almost inconceivable to people originally when they hear this to say, really? That's a religion? Actually, yeah, it is a religion. It doesn't have any foundation. There's nothing that could prove it. Now, am I against things that can't be proven? No. Obviously, the religion that I'm part of is one that also is a belief system. But that's not how their belief system operates in the public sphere. Their belief system is one that is intolerant of any other worldview and says, okay, your ethics and your spirituality, they're fine in your private life, but don't dare bring that into public life, because there, what counts in our life in the economy, for sure, and in our government, what counts there is money and power, or that which can be verified through sense datum or measured. Making as much money for ruling elites as possible is really the goal of the hidden goal that unifies the whole system, and even for those who, like you and I, support people who want to make some way of helping or caring for other people. So political parties emerged, one that was unequivocally committed to serving the ruling elites and making as much money for them as possible, and another which was actually also funded by the ruling elites and still is, but recognized in a society where there's huge disparities of wealth, the whole system might not remain secure if it became so it became in favor for minimal reforms to alleviate the suffering of the most extreme forms of suffering of the poor and the working class. And this is where you get, in Europe, you get social democrats as well as conservative parties. In the United States, we have the Republican Party representing the clear interest of the ruling elites, but also of the Democratic Party, which wants to, actually has many decent people in it wanting to alleviate some of the suffering in the world, but at the same time always compromising to make the minimal reforms, because they don't want to alienate the ruling elites who have the power and own the media and control the media. So both parties, people in both parties have, in fact, embraced the religion of scientism. Both use similar criteria to judge their success. And so you'll see whenever there's a new program put forward by liberals in the Congress or in the public sphere, people immediately ask, well, who's going to pay for this? Now, of course, they ask that question when the ruling elites say, we need a war against these other people, okay? Because they're threatening abroad or in some other place to overthrow they're allies of our domestic elites, and we don't want that to happen. So nobody asks, well, how much will that cost, right? No, but but the very many good people who are in the reform-oriented parties are actually really wanting things to get better for the those people who have material losses or material trouble, don't have enough. So in the United States, the Democratic Party, in Europe, the socialist parties and the labor parties still champion the old bottom line and its criteria of success. But since they wanted to emphasize that they would, when practical and when it wouldn't cost the capitalist elites too much worry and too much in the way of loss of money or power, they wanted to alleviate the material economic suffering of the rest of the population. So don't get me wrong what I'm saying. I'm not, first of all, of course, I'm not endorsing any party. I'm not allowed to, as we're a nonprofit, but also I wouldn't endorse any candidate or anything like that. But what I'm trying to do is give us a perspective on what's going on. Why is it that the liberal and progressive parties keep on failing? Why don't they have more and more and more success? Eventually you get those liberal parties being dominated by a group of liberals who call themselves neoliberals because they want to, they overtly want to take care of the poor and the hungry, etc. But they believe that that has to be done in a way that pleases the ruling elites on the economic sphere. And so they make the economic thing totally primary. What they miss is that the influence of scientism that they are under pushes them away from recognizing another form of suffering that people have in this society, and that is the suffering, the psychological and spiritual suffering in this society. And what if you asked them, they would say, well, that stuff that's purely personal. That's something you can address in your personal life, but it has nothing to do with politics. It has no place in politics. And so they ignore this fundamental dimension of human life. So that causes a rupture of support in the following way. You have the liberals who, when they get into power, make some minimal advances, and some of it is good. I mean, it's not like all bad. Some of the things that they do is good, but they leave intact the fundamentals of the system because they also share scientism and hence the belief that what really counts is money and power. And in a world in which that's the case, then you have to bow to or listen to those who control the media and who have the money to support your candidacy if you want to run for office. Actually, they end up often, that is the liberals, the neoliberals, supporting the financial needs of the super wealthy and the corporations. And hence they actually often fail to address the ongoing poverty and in the richest country in the world. That's us, okay? Not because they're dumb or haven't figured out, recognized that none of their programs have narrowed the gap between rich and poor, which in fact has grown in the past 50 years. Okay, the gap between the rich and poor has not been alleviated by having the Great Society of Johnson or the or the presidency of any of the Democrats who've been in that office. I'm blanking for the moment. Of course, Obama and Clinton, and I'm forgetting the guy who endorsed my book on Israel-Palestine. Carter, right? Okay. So, but this gap between rich and poor has grown greater. But because to eliminate it, they, while in office, would have to tax away some of the money accumulated by the super rich, which they dare not even talk about, discuss, lest they be labeled communists, socialists, anarchists, or just plain evil. So while they open the doors of the economy to a small percentage of people of color, for example, who can rise up, they simultaneously undermine the social support system that is most necessary to offset devastating situations of most people of color who remain stuck in the lower 80% of economic earners in the population and who own a fraction of what the top 1% own. When the movement for Black Lives calls upon us to create a guaranteed income for everyone, financed by a tax on the wealthy or wealth of the upper 1%, and reparations for slavery, and reduction in budget of police forces, and giving many of their helping activities of the police to social workers rather than to people armed and holding racist ideas. The mainstream of liberals step away from this and tell us that we're being unrealistic. And they vote for a Biden rather than a Bernie, telling themselves that if Bernie were to have been their candidate, Trump would label the election about saving the country from socialism, not understanding that, and from socialism. They didn't understand that Trump would do that anyway by calling Biden a socialist revolutionary, championing chaos and threatening the suburbs by bringing in more people of color. Okay? Because, of course, in this society, racism can be used no matter what the facts of the matter if a political party no longer feels responsible to speaking truth. Yet increasingly, neoliberalism is not only a system, but a full-grown worldview that has been reshaping American society for the past 42 years. As Henry Giraud, one of our writers for Tikkun, describes it, central to its philosophy is the assumption that the market drives not just the economy, but all social life. It construes profit-making as the essence of democracy and consuming as the only operable form of agency. It redefines identities, desires, and values through a market logic that privileges self-interest, survival of the fittest ethos, and unchecked individualism. Under neoliberalism, life draining and unending competition is a central concept for defining human freedom, and growth, the growth of our economy, producing more and more and more goods, is the sign of a healthy economy. But meanwhile, while they're producing more and more goods, they're acting as though they're acting on the assumption that that the earth is actually a bottomless cookie jar, and you just keep on taking out the cookies one after another, and it's endless, and it'll all be fine. But guess what? It's not true. The earth itself is finite, and the more that you take out of it, the less there is for future generations. And the very thing that they're doing when they're saying, hey, this is what counts. This is because, of course, you can always count the amount of stuff that's being produced, but they never, incidentally, ever count what's left in the earth after they've taken out the wealth from that supposedly bottomless cookie jar. But what they actually are doing is depleting the earth dramatically. Now, that added to the fact that a lot of what they produce is junk, that they only can sell by producing in us through their advertising and a sense of need. We need these things, and if you don't need them, you're not with it. So so we need a new a computer every few years. We need a new iPhone every few years. We need a new car every few years. On and on and on, convincing people that they need the newest version, the cutest version, the most fuzzy version, whatever, of these consumer goods. Government then exists to maximize the profits of those who have that profit. This is a system that there. Now, let me again repeat. I'm not saying that there's no difference between the old line conservatives who have given support to fascist and racist movements and the neoliberals who promise to rectify inequality, healthcare, and racism, but actually never deliver because they seek to be seen as responsible by the economic elites. Okay, so when in the Clinton administration was the place where they got rid of welfare in the way that had been given in the past. They said, and that opened up a high school to prison pipeline in which mass incarceration of African Americans took place. Not under a reactionary. He's not a reactionary. He wasn't a reactionary. He was maybe a certain amount of racism. But even that, I doubt very much if that was, it was only de facto racism. It wasn't in his mind that he was a racist. He hated black people, but that he wanted to do something that would help the ruling elite see that he was responsible for the things that they cared about. But if the liberal parties are identified with policies that actually don't decrease the material suffering or give the minimalist approach of doing that, and if they don't address the other kinds of suffering that I'm talking about, the spiritual and psychological suffering. Now, why is there so much spiritual and psychological suffering in this society? Well, because of two things that the capitalist order has denied them, has denied most people. The first thing is respect, and the second thing is a sense of work or of life that has some meaning and purpose higher than the purpose of accumulating money and power. So why don't they deliver the respect? Well, here's a problem that they can't, within their framework, overcome. Number one, the primary self-justification of the capitalist order's inequalities is this. We live in a meritocracy, and because we're in a meritocracy, those who have less in their life are deserve that because they didn't work hard enough or they weren't smart enough. Whereas those of us who are at the top, let's say the top 1%, or even this view is shared, the meritocracy at least by the top 10 to 20% of the population, because who are doing better than most of the rest, by saying, look, we're smarter, we worked harder, we deserve it, you see. That leads to a huge amount of self-blaming on the part of everybody else. So when I, as the director of the Institute for Labor and Mental Health, which was the thing I did before creating Tikkun magazine and Beit Tikkun, and had an NIM. I was the principal investigator of an NIMH study of the psychodynamics of work and family life. I discovered that one of the reasons people were moving to the right was because they felt that they were disrespected by people on the left. Now, I brought this to left people, and they said, that's impossible. Why? that's ridiculous. Of course we respect them. But then when I pointed out what they used as their evidence, they said that when they were part of liberal progressive movements, they always had the feeling that they were seen as less than. And in particular, any of them who had any religious or spiritual inclinations were seen as less than. Now, so liberals and progressives said, yeah, we want you here. We want you to be in our organization. We want you to be in our movement. We want you to be in our demonstrations. We want you to vote for us. But then what they reported is, but meanwhile, they were hearing people talking about those people and listening to who those people were. And those people were working class people who were actually, in the United States, 60% of the people claim that they go to church once a month. It's not true. They're wrong. They're lying about that. But they value, the reason they say that is because they value that picture of themselves. Okay, so you have a left that has a huge amount of antipathy towards religion. And we see it over and over again, and people were telling us over and over and over again that. Now, let me say, to be fair, a lot of people on the left grew up in religious families that were racist, sexist, homophobic, xenophobic, anti-Semitic, one or more of those sicknesses. And so they rebelled against it and said, we don't want any more part of religion itself. But they ignored the fact that there are religious movements then and now that are really strongly progressive in their essence. They ignore the fact that the most significant movement of African Americans in the 20th century was led at key points by the church, and particularly by Martin Luther King Jr. and other churches that supported King, but not just King, but by lots of other progressive churches. But that attitude showed disrespect. It also, many of the people in the liberal and progressive world hold on to the idea that it's a meritocracy. And they get this idea, if they don't say it explicitly about economics, they buy into some of the pop psychology or pop religion that says something like this. You have problems in your life. Things aren't working for you. You created your own reality, and only you can change it. Now, of course, as a psychotherapist, which I have been for the last 40 years, as a psychotherapist, I understand that that's partly true, that each of us does have some responsibility for some of what's going on in our lives, and we need to work on that. But the truth that pop psychology and pop religion never deals with is that there's an economic structure. There's a structure of capitalism and inequality that's based on inequality, and in which there's almost no mobility. There's some mobility, but as the New York Times study of mobility 10 years ago, it showed that the mobility over the course of the past 50 years had been almost zilch. It was like 1 or 2% of the population was able to move from up in the class divisions, but most people couldn't move up at all. So that's one level of it, that they couldn't move up. But it's also another level, and that is when you work all day in a work situation in which over and over again you're told that your value is maximizing money and power for others, and you see yourself in competition with others, and then you go home and most of the people that we talked to, they said, I hate being in this kind of a world. So we said, okay, well, why don't you change it then? Why don't you join social movements to change it? And their answer was simple. You're right, it would be great if we could change it, but it can't be changed because everybody else is selfish and materialistic and looking out just for number one. So how can I make any changes in that? That is, they had bought the notion that people were stuck in a particular place and that they would not be able to change. So they said very upfront, hey, there's no option but for me to look out for number one and to be selfish and with myself. Look out for number one, maximize my own advantage. Don't worry about everybody else, because that's what everybody else is doing. Okay, so do you see how this works? That leads people to that sense that that there is no alternative than to continue that way of being. But now, let's say you go home and you've been in this work, and it's not just men. It used to be just men, but now it's men and women in the work world. They come home and they make choices about who their partner will be based on the notion of who amongst the people that might be interested in me would satisfy most of my needs, and walk away saying, okay, this one is the one who will satisfy more of my needs than anybody else who's likely to like me. So I'll get married to that one, or I'll build a relationship with that one. But that creates incredible insecurity for people. Okay, incredible insecurity, because they never know when their partner might at some point in their life make a different choice. And I'm not just talking about the 45% of marriages that end up in divorce. I'm also talking about the rest, because the rest don't know if they're part of that 45% or not, because at any moment your partner might leave you. So tremendous insecurity in this world, and feeling that they don't really deserve much. And the second thing is that what we discovered is that people actually have a desire for a meaning and purpose for their life that transcends the selfishness and materialism of the capitalist marketplace. They desire something very, very different, but they just don't believe it's possible, or at least they haven't seen it being actualized in the liberal and progressive world, which in any event looks down on this whole notion of higher meaning and purpose and thinks it is basically a bunch of spiritual baloney. Okay, so now of course I know I'm making a big generalization here, and there are places in the left where that's not the case. But I've been involved in social change movements for the past 50 years, actually more, since 1964. So we're a little bit more than 50 years, right? 55 years. Okay. What? 56 years. Okay. And it's almost impossible. I've been in so many different organizations. I've visited so many different movements and so forth. You rarely hear any serious attention to a higher meaning and purpose to life. Why? Because they, like almost everybody else in the society, has bought into the notion that what really counts for people is money and economic things that can be measured. Okay, so when it comes to this other stuff, it sounds suspiciously like religion, and they don't want to have anything to do with it. Okay. And actually, more recently, and I write about this in my book, Revolutionary Love, that just came out last year, Revolutionary Love, that we went and asked many men who were in positions of power, and actually many women who were in positions of power in organizations that were left-wing organizations or progressive organizations seeking change in the world. We asked them, why don't you talk about this stuff? And what they said was simple. They said, we'll look like we're, what the governor of, Governor Schwarzenegger at the Republican National Convention 25 years ago said something like this. Those liberals, they're girly men. They're girly men. They're not strong. They don't know how to fight. And many of these men, instead of standing up and saying, you know what, girls are good. They've learned a lot of wonderful things that would be great if all men had some of the caring for others that many girls learn when they're younger. Not to idealize all girls, because of course when they're living in this society, and they want to be successful, they got to make themselves more like men. At least that's what they think, in order to be successful. But in any event, the men are saying, no, we can't take on questions like higher meaning or purpose. We don't want anything to do with that because we'll be laughed at by the tough-minded Republicans and the tough-minded other people in our own organizations. So that it's this conundrum that leads the liberal and progressive world to not address these issues. But meanwhile, the right does address it. The right, particularly the right-wing churches, offer people a place in which they are accepted and cared for. You go to a right-wing church, and you'll see how many of them really take care of each other, and they tell people, you're in pain because of what's going on in your life, and you're not to blame. And that message that you're not to blame is a huge relief. Now, the downside, however, is that the reason you're not to blame is because the pain in your life is caused by, and this is a universal formula all around the world, wherever you find right-wing movements, this is the formula. The pain in your life is caused by the demeaned others of our society. In the first half of the 20th century, the demeaned other in Europe was the Jews. So everything that was wrong, it's the Jews who are at fault. Right now, by the way, we're seeing a rise of anti-Semitism in the United States, in which also you've got now people on radio and people in the social media saying, "Oh well, this is just the Jews trying to take over the world," and people are coming to believe that, although there's no basis for it whatsoever, and it's obviously false. But obvious to us, but not obvious to people who are hearing that kind of teaching. But that's not the main. The main frame in the United States has still been to blame African Americans, Native Americans, gays and lesbians, feminists, and now increasingly people who are not just socialists, but even Democrats or liberals or progressives, and of course the people who are refugees coming to our country, or people who are immigrants. All of these are becoming the demeaned others of the society. So it's a terrible price that they're paying to find a place where there's love and caring and support. But why doesn't the left figure this out? Because it also is in the same the worldview that says what really counts is something that's objective and can be measured, and not something that is ephemeral, like higher meaning and purpose. So you can't actually achieve the transformation in this society until you develop a different fundamental worldview, and that has to start with the liberal and progressive world. They have to adopt a different way of seeing what counts, a different religion. And that different religion is one that validates love and caring and kindness and generosity, and says this is the key. So we at Tikkun and Beit Tikkun and the network of spiritual progressives have put forward the notion of a new bottom line. The new bottom line says that you judge any institution efficient, rational, and productive, including the corporations, the economic system, our government, our judicial system, our healthcare system, our educational system, all of the systems, to be efficient, rational, and productive, not only to the extent that they maximize money and power, that's the old bottom line, but to the extent that they maximize love and caring, kindness and generosity, ethical and environmental sensitivity and involvement in protecting the environment, capable of seeing other human beings as embodiments of the holy, rather than seeing them simply from the standpoint of what can we get from them, what will how will they serve my purpose? And looking at the world itself from the standpoint of awe and wonder and radical amazement at this incredible earth that we live in. So this is the new bottom line. And if we as a community could take this up and start preaching it to others and not, to our friends, to our family, and really taking it seriously for ourselves, that our value is not in terms of our success in the economic marketplace. Our value is in the degree to which we are able to express and be embodiments of love and caring and kindness and generosity and environmental sensitivity and awe and wonder at the grandeur of the universe and seeing others as embodiments of the sacred. That's what a meaningful life would be. That's what a life that actually embodies a new way of being in the world. And that new way of being could spread very, very, very quickly because people are hungry for it, but they don't hear it. At least they don't hear it from the liberal and progressive world. So that's why what we're doing in Beit Tikkun and Tikkun and the network of spiritual progressives is so important because the earth has sent us a message in the form of darkened skies from smoke of hundreds, and the smoke of hundreds of fires that blacken the entire West Coast. And it's sending a message when it's having huge flooding in the south of our country. And the suffering is going to increase and increase and increase. It can only change if we have a different message and a different way of seeing, of valuing people not for how much money they make, and helping people who are caught in that to tell them, no, you are valuable, not allowing them to hold on to the message that was given by Hillary Clinton that probably, if you're not on our side, you're a bundle of deplorables, but rather seeing other people as fundamentally valuable because they're embodiments of the sacred. And even if they disagree with us, even if they are politically wrong from our standpoint, even if they are backing ideas that are wrong, there is a significant section of people in the right wing now, who are voting for the right-wing candidates, who are there not because their core is racist, sexist, homophobic, anti-Semitic, but because they feel that they get no respect from us, that we are putting them down, that we are disrespecting them. But I have yet to see a single elected official or a single prominent liberal or progressive say, hey, we apologize for what Hillary Clinton said. We don't see you as deplorables. We see you as people who are fundamentally valuable. We disagree with some of your ideas. We want those to change. We're not going to pretend that we think we're the same as you in that respect. We think there are some mistaken ideas that you have. But fundamentally, we see you as deserving of respect and caring. And by the way, if your life isn't all that you want it to be, don't blame yourself. There's a system here that makes selfishness and materialism the center. So the challenge today for all of us is to build a world based on love and kindness and generosity, and to challenge the ethos of selfishness and materialism that is endemic into the capitalist marketplace and hence indoctrinated into the consciousness of so many people. And we have to stop business as usual. We have to stop the destruction of this of the life support system of the planet Earth, and engage in this other activity. And this is the way to make that happen: to stop the othering, to stop the telling yourself that you are powerless, because it's a lie. You have real power. You can work with others. Don't say, by the way, in later point in your life, oh, well, I didn't know what to do, okay? If you don't know what to do, join us. Join the network of spiritual progressives. Join Tikkun magazine. Join the Beit Tikkun. Be part of us and take the training that Kat Zavis is offering. This one here, Kat, is offering in the network of spiritual progressives for teaching a prophetic empathy. Learn about it at spiritualprogressives.org/training. Well, there's a lot of what Rosh Hashanah and the 10 days of repentance, the last being Yom Kippur, are really about. We need to wake up from all the stories that have told us that there is nothing we can do. The curve in the shofar teaches us that life is not always straight ahead. It's a curve because there are paths with twists and turns. Our tradition teaches us, though, that the shape of the shofar reminds us that we are not forced to continue in a linear trajectory that we've been on for much of our lives. The energetic direction of our lives can be turned to look back, to return, to review, so that we can make repairs and amends. So we blow the shofar in part to remind us to come back to our highest inner place so that we can more fully be God's partner. But in part because we are making a sound to God. Hey, God, we're here. Don't forget us. And let us not forget God within us. Let that part of us that is God inside of us, and actually that we are inside God, awaken that God place inside of us and proclaim without words that there is a mystery that cannot be contained in our words, that is beyond rationality and cannot be captured in language, but only sung to, praised, acknowledged in our inner being. So the sounds of the shofar, precisely because they are not words, allow us to transcend our categories and come into contact with the ultimate and the ineffable one. And in that moment, we're able to honestly see where we have gone astray and where we reconnect with the God of the universe. I'll talk about this more on Yom Kippur, but this talk is slightly misleading because it is not only that God is in us, but that we are in God, because the spiritual reality of the universe is never separate from the material reality of the universe and of human life, as we are all swimming in it all the time, even as it is ever present to remind us of our highest possible selves. It is in this moment of hearing shofar that many of us allow ourselves to feel that call and start to really feel committed to doing more than coming once a year to a high holiday services.